And we're back with the Barbell Nerds podcast. I am Sean, my co-host Will. We welcome Molly Binetti to the Barbell Nerds podcast today. Molly, thank you for spending the time with us today.
No, I really appreciate it, guys. I'm excited to spend the night with you guys and talk about a lot of different things, but really appreciate your time and having me on.
Happy to have you on. For those of you that don't know Molly, she's the Director of Basketball Sports Performance at the University of South Carolina. Currently where I'm representing my Atlanta Braves, and Freddie Freeman just won the MVP tonight. So that
I did just see that.
That's my guy. Anyway, not to diverge away from it, but Molly, please tell everybody a little bit about yourself, history, bio, anything you want.
Yeah, no, appreciate it. Like you said, I've been at University of South Carolina now this is my third season. This is my eighth. Yeah, just started my eighth full-time year as a strength and conditioning coach. My third stop. So I spent right out of grad school, I spent a year at Purdue working with, a multitude of teams. I think I worked with 7 or 8 different teams while I was there. And after a year, I made the move to the University of Louisville, and from there kind of narrowed down my teams. I worked with basketball, softball, tennis, volleyball. I knew at some point in my career that basketball was the route I wanted to at least explore. It was a sport that I always loved growing up. I played it all throughout high school, played club basketball in college. One of my first exposures when I started interning was with our men's and women's basketball teams at Marquette. And so I knew at some point, I knew there were positions available that was just basketball, and that for whatever reason at that time, really appealed to me. And I knew I wanted to at least explore it. But I spent my time at Louisville really opened my eyes to a lot of different realms and elements of our field that I really wasn't exposed to before. And it kind of got me thinking about all the different routes that I might want to take. And so basketball was on my radar, but I also had my eyes set on some other things. But this job at South Carolina came open, and I actually turned down the opportunity to go for an interview the first time it came open. I was really happy where I was, and it just taken on some new responsibilities, gotten a raise. I was in a good spot. I had a good life there. And then I fast forward a year, this job came open again. I got a call and basically was told, you need to be ready because the coaches are calling you. And at that point I knew I had to listen and at least explore that opportunity. And, I couldn't think of a better opportunity or better position to navigate the basketball world than, to work under Hall of Fame coach Dawn Staley, and obviously a program that was a year removed from winning a national championship. So decided to kind of take the leap and go down this route. And it's been a heck of a ride, but it's been fun. So yeah, in year 3 here, finally feel like I'm just hitting my stride.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. So obviously you like basketball. You like what you're doing there with the Gamecocks down there. So I looked at your bio earlier, and I just saw that you had 2 published articles in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research. So I went and looked them up. Do you just want to talk about those 2 pieces of research that you were involved with? It looks like they were both involved with basketball players. I just like to get your thoughts on the research that you've conducted and how that shaped the way you program, the way you train, because obviously you're heavily involved with basketball only now. I just like to get your thoughts and maybe have you expand on what you saw in the research.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I consider myself really fortunate. My first year at Purdue, we had a woman, Tanya Spiteri. She came over from Australia to actually finish her PhD and assist us with a lot of things on the sports science side. At the time we were really just starting to develop, our force plate testing and really, the sports science, side of what we do. And so we were lucky for her to come over for an extended period of time. And so I got to meet her when I was a 23-year-old, working full time and had no real idea what I was doing, and really no idea the people that I was meeting at that time and how influential they would be on my career. But I got to become good friends with Tanya, and we got to do some really cool research while we were there. I didn't work with women's basketball directly, but I got to kind of help out and assist whenever I could and had a free minute. And so we, as part of her PhD work, did a lot of performance testing with our women's basketball team and combined that with the research that she had from the Australian National Basketball League. We then also got to go down to Indianapolis and do testing on the Indiana Fever WNBA team. And I got to assist with all of those testing protocols while I was there. I was also lucky in the fact that I didn't really have to do a ton of writing in terms of actually publishing those articles, but I did get to be involved in the entire research process. And then we also did testing as well when I made the jump to Louisville the following year. And Tanya is somebody, and I also got the opportunity to work with Dr. Nymphius, from an early age too. She was heavily involved in, she oversaw Tanya at the time. And so she would make frequent trips to Purdue and assist with that process. And it really opened my eyes early on to kind of that side of things. And that kind of sparked my interest in force plate testing, in performance testing, and just the strength and power aspect of what we do, and specifically when it came to basketball. And so it was really cool to be involved in that process and see, from my own personal interest, but also in the work that we do with our athletes, the differences between levels of, what separates elite basketball players from, your average population. How does that differ from college making the jump to the pros in the US? How does that compare to pros in Australia? And obviously, I research or I reference those articles that I got a chance to work on, several years ago now in terms of what I do from a programming side of things. And, I still keep in contact with Tanya, and she's a huge resource for me. But it was really cool to just, from a really young age, be involved and see what that process looked like, and obviously have a hands-on approach to it, and really get a feel for some other routes that I could go in strength and conditioning as well.
And when you're talking about the jump from college to pros, high school to college, those different levels, was there a certain physical trait or physical attribute that separated those levels that you saw?
Yeah, we definitely saw differences, and the biggest ones were in the strength levels. And and in the mechanical determinants paper too, we saw, especially in that eccentric force and the isometric force levels, were two of the biggest ones that we saw. And so that, almost just kind of confirmed. And I think, we know from a general standpoint, regardless of level, from a basketball standpoint, how important those two elements are, with the amount of, the thousands of changes of direction that occur in a given practice or a game. But having that superior strength level, and obviously from that, having greater power outputs, having greater performances on, the 505 and different tests from an agility standpoint too, it just makes sense when you look at, the ones that are able to, you even look at them move, and you look at them, their ability to stop on a dime, change direction. You look at the best athletes in the world, and they're the ones that are able to stop and then reaccelerate faster than the other player. And so it makes a lot of sense. So those are the two biggest ones that we saw.
Yeah. Was there anything that surprised you about either of the two papers?
I don't know that anything surprised me, to be honest. I think at the time, going through the process, a lot of it probably didn't make complete sense to me, because I was still learning and I was so young.
Yeah.
But now when I'm in a place where I obviously have acquired a little bit more knowledge, and I don't I still feel like I don't know anything, but now looking back, it makes more sense. At the time, I think it was more so I just didn't know. So it was new to me. But yeah, I wouldn't say anything is really surprising, especially now knowing what I do, it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Are you using a lot? I don't know what you have at South Carolina, but I'm assuming you're using some sort of force plate technology to measure different variables, measure different athletic assessments, everything like that. If you are, or you could talk about when you did, how were those measurements that you were taking driving the decision-making process that you guys were using to either test in the weight room, playing time, or even just practicing in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. And full disclosure, I'd say the first 5 years of my career, I had access to, every type of technology you could think of. And
I know Louisville, because
yes,
I think you worked with Chris Hayes whenever he was there.
Yes,
Chris
I
is
did.
a good buddy of mine, and he's like, I really liked it at Louisville.
It was, it really was kind of like working in a fantasy world. And, I was really lucky. We had access to so many different things. And so And everything that we did was really driven by technology and driven by, when I
Credit
transitioned.
Tina Murray to all that too, because she was the driving
Yes.
force behind a lot of that.
Yes, she made things happen. And yeah, it was incredible to see. And she did everything in her power to make sure that we had the resources we need, from a physical standpoint, but obviously from just a career development standpoint as well. I could talk a long time about that. She's awesome. But it's kind of funny because I went from this environment where I had all this technology at my fingertips and used it on a daily basis. And I came to South Carolina, and to be honest, we don't have anything. The only technology that I use is the Polar Team Pro system with our team, and we have a jump mat. I use the jump mat, but to be honest, we don't have, we don't have gym wear. We don't have tendos. I use, when we do sprints, I use a stopwatch. And to be honest, like I've realized, I think the longer I've gotten in my career too, like all of that stuff it's really nice. And don't get me wrong, like it's shiny, it's impactful. And when you use it the right way, it can really help drive decision making. But I've really had to kind of do a makeshift approach to, what we call sports science or just technology in my current position. But I make it work, and I still use what I have to help drive decision making. And while it might not give you the most technical information or the most precise, I've also realized too that that's a small piece of the puzzle, and there's so many more elements that go into it. And it's about really making it work in your environment, developing really, really good relationships where the subjective aspect, can drive so much of that decision making as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of that because I've talked about it before, but like probably starting a year, maybe a little bit longer than a year ago, I got really into like we had the push bands. I got really into just like measuring so many different things and trying to get really deep into the metrics. And like I've said before, I just tried to get so deep into it that it all hit me at once. And it was like, well, now I have all this data and I can't do anything with it. There's nothing actionable here. And so I've really like pushed that away and tried to get more to, I don't know if I want to like the right way to describe it, but like an organic approach where I'm not worried about somebody's like force output or their jump height as much. Like we still use the tendos and the jump mats, but that's not like the sole focus of how I'm programming. And it's so relatable to what you just said, because I've definitely been in around a bunch of technology, and now I'm just like, let's get to a point of where we're just worried about let's focus on the training and not the actual metrics, because I just feel like we're going to get more out of if we're focusing on the training, less on the metrics, and let things happen organically. So I just wanted to kind of touch on that a little bit with you too.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that. What would you say, I think what it comes down to is like what really matters, and what,
Right.
What are we gathering just to say that we have, and that to know first what really matters in this person being good at, X, Y, or Z sport. And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on, or I guess how you kind of trimmed the fat on that, and how you decided to eliminate some things. What did you decide to stick with, and I guess your approach with that?
Really, I just stopped. Like we will still like use the tendos and get the direct feedback from certain sets, but I'm not going to record them, and we're not going to track it over time. And what I was doing is I was getting like jump heights on jump mats. I was getting RPE scores, fatigue scores, velocity velocity measures on certain lifts, and then I was trying to give that to the coaches, the basketball coaches, and say, hey, this is what I'm getting. How does it match up with them on the court? Do they look like they're performing well? Do they look like they're tired? And it wasn't very conducive, like it didn't work very well, because they're saying one thing on the court. And like, if I'm being honest with myself, what matters is them playing basketball. The coaches don't really care what's going on in the weight room. They want me to do my job, which is to just physically prepare them for the demands of basketball. They don't really care what they're how fast they're moving 60% of a back squat is, so like that I just cut a lot of it out, and we still use it for direct feedback, but I don't record it. I'm not looking at last week's number and saying, hey, this is what you did last week. This is what you're doing today. Let's adjust at this micro level. I'm not doing any of that anymore. That's where I've really changed the most.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think, yes, I would, maybe this is an unpopular opinion. I think, especially now with the influx of like the tools that we have at our disposal, but like I would put my money on having, like, when you have really, really good relationships with your athletes and your coaches, and trust their ability to have conversations with you about certain things, that can provide more valuable information and more decision-making ability than the fanciest of, whether it's a Gym Aware or a Sparta or whatever it might be. Like I've seen that in action in our environment, and I would put money on that, and I would rather have that 10 out of 10 times, like without even question. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I can't echo that enough. I just totally agree with all that.
I will say one of the things that helped me the most, just from a testing perspective, it's not even a whole lot of data. It's literally, I use my stopwatch. I clocked their 3/4 court sprint, and I tested their vertical jump, and then I gave the exact results, and I highlighted the number one person on there, because that way, when that number one person, and Will knows exactly what I'm talking about, was a little lazy when it comes to doing like conditioning work during practice, coach knew exactly who the fastest person was and called him out and said, "Why aren't you running hard?" Because they were dogging that little conditioning down and back at the end if they lost a session or something. That was fun for me, because I'm like, yeah, you are the fastest, prove it. But again, that's
right.
Say again.
Yeah, no, I said that's human behavior too, right? Like that's, like, you talk about getting to the core of, some people's drives and motivations too. Like that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what it is. And if I try to just make it as much as competitive a nature in the weight room as I possibly could. And I know you do the same, because you post a lot of the stuff on your Instagram about your girls, and your girls are doing awesome. Do you have, like, I guess, certain weight room testing that you really dive into to drive their competitive nature in the weight room?
Yes and no. I think one of the things I've steered more towards, especially the past couple of years, is really building in elements of competition and competitiveness every single day in our lifts, and opportunities just built into, whether it's their set and rep scheme, whether it's the exercise, where it's not just, a day every few weeks where we're gathering some numbers, but every day we're collecting information, and they've got an opportunity to compete against themselves and a chance to compete against their teammates too. And now that kind of happens organically when I do, there are certain tests that I'll do every, few weeks or, months, depending on what it is, whether that's our jump testing. But as far as like our strength goes and just different like exercises that I choose, I try to incorporate some aspect of that almost every day. Because that, I think, is, you can't teach somebody how to compete. Like that's like one of those internal drivers that's like, you can work hard all you want, but you cannot, like, competing in everything that you do is something different. And like, luckily we get the type of kids that are really driven, and obviously they're good at basketball, but we have a group that competes in everything that they do. Whether it's just a simple drill in practice, whether it's, how much someone's doing on a lat pull down. They see their teammates do it for a certain amount of reps, and then the next person hops in and they're trying to either get more or, go up in weight, whatever it is. Like that's the type of environment that I try to create. And that's really just through some simple things and how I program. And, whether that's, maybe an example is, a plus set. Let's say we have bench press, and I don't know, let's say we have like set of 5, set of 5, set of 5 plus. And then at the end, they have a chance to see how many they can get at a certain load. And then their teammates are doing the same thing. And you can track that week to week. That's just a simple example, but definitely, it's a combination of one, having that type of personality on our team, but also too, like, that's, you want to create an environment that these kids want to be a part of, and they want to be a part of something that's fun. They want to compete. And I give them some say in what they do as well. And that also helps kind of drive that competitiveness and their desire to actually put forth the effort and the intensity, because it's something that they're choosing and that they want to do.
What would you say is the biggest difference culture-wise going from volleyball, tennis, basketball, or even Minnesota, Purdue, Louisville, South Carolina? Have you had to kind of mold yourself to fit in with like the team culture at South Carolina or anywhere else you've been, or fit in with the team culture specifically with basketball players compared to other sports?
For sure. And, I think we can all probably agree that it's kind of a roller coaster. Like, you go through different points in your career where it's like you're trying to mimic certain people because that's who you learn under, and you haven't really fully formed like your personality and coaching identity yet. And so you kind of, you act a certain way when you feel like you have to, and then you realize, more about yourself, and you start to adapt and change. And I think the number one quality we have to have as a coach is you have to adapt, because every individual is different, every team is different, every head coach is different. And obviously, we've got to be firm in our identity and who we are, and I think, the biggest lesson I've ever learned is like being authentic and being true to myself has always worked out better than when I try to, fit a certain persona, or anytime I've tried to act a certain way because I felt like that's what the coach wanted, or that's what, was required of me in that moment. And those moments and times in my career have always just left me like in this state of frustration of like, and I think we have these stereotypes and perceptions on us too of like, okay, we're the strength coach. You have to act like a hard ass. You have to, be controlling and be demanding, and we're loud, and we have this certain voice and all of these things. And so there's definitely been times in my career where I've fallen victim to that. And especially as a female too, sometimes you think you have to assert yourself a little bit more. And, I've just realized the older I've gotten that it doesn't work, and your athletes can see through it. So yes, every team and every culture is definitely different. Every year has been a learning experience in terms of figuring out more of who I am and understanding that better, and becoming more self-aware of, what I'm good at, what are my weaknesses, and where are my blind spots, and how can I grow in those areas. And obviously you have to adapt a little bit of who you are no matter who you're working with. But, I think when you have a really firm identity and understanding of your values and just, being authentic, that goes so much further. And so I definitely, even in my, 2.5 years here now, have struggled with that. And now, I feel like I'm in the best place I've ever been professionally and personally, to be honest, in terms of just being comfortable in my own skin, and knowing that regardless of who I work with, I have a better understanding of people. I know how to connect with people better, and can adapt that way to what the individual and team needs, but also still be myself and coach in a way that, works for me.
Yeah. Sean, you'll remember this, but when I first started working with the volleyball team at UND, the kind of the culture that the head coach wanted, he's no longer here, but I thought I had to be this like military drill sergeant with the girls, and that's not my personality at all. And I kind of like my first 2 weeks, I was just so uncomfortable and like trying to bark orders, and that's just not who I am. And that's not a little bit more freedom than what the coach wanted. And so, yeah, I totally understand where you're coming from, where you're trying to be someone you're not, and the kids see right through it, and it just doesn't work.
For sure. I'm curious what you guys think about this. One of the things that, one of my good mentors has told me, and it's honestly affected how I almost enter in every conversation. And I think it's, really relevant to what we're talking about here, is just like, obviously we've got to adapt on a daily basis, for each individual we work with, for our coaches, honestly, for any relationship that we have in our life. Like, every day we've got to be flexible and adaptable. But it's like, you ask yourself 2 questions before you enter in. Like, let's say your team's coming into the weight room. Like, how are these athletes, or how is this person about to experience me? And who do they need me to be right now? Because it's different. you've got to treat volleyball different than basketball because they have totally different experiences and backgrounds and expectations. Like I've got to treat every individual on my team, even though they're all basketball players, I've got to treat each of them differently and understand how to connect with each of them and adapt to, who they need me to be. Like we can still get the work that we need to done. I don't have to yell. I don't even have to talk or direct some of them. Like I can just stand back and let them do their thing if that's what they need. And being okay with that, of like letting go of control a little bit and letting go of the idea of like, okay, this is what the weight room needs to look like. This is how it needs to be run. This is the, being so concerned about culture as opposed to just like, okay, who does this person need me to be? And how can I be that? And just adapt, like minute by minute, really.
Yeah, I agree, but at the same time, and I'm not saying that you're asserting this at all, but like we don't want to set different standards for different people, and then it turns into like people thinking you're favoring other people because you're talking to them a little bit differently. So yeah, like definitely, I've never asked myself those two questions when I walk in though. What were they? What does this athlete need me to be?
Yeah,
And
yeah. How is
perceiving me?
How is X, or how is Will about to experience me right now? And I think that allows you to kind of check yourself and kind of check your emotions and bias and whatever you're feeling in that moment. Like, how are they about to experience me? And then, yeah, who does this person need me to be right now? And we've all experienced it. Like, an athlete comes in late, instead of jumping down their throat and they've got some punishment for being late. Like, okay, who does this person need me to be right now? Like maybe they're coming in and you can tell like they're just like strained and there's something, obviously something off. Like, who does that person need me to be in that moment? Am I just going to jump on them because, our rule is you've got to be on time? Or can I take a step back and just like let go of my ego for a second and like figure out, what's going on? And I think you're 100% right. Like, and that by no means is like you have different standards for each individual, but it's just like they, our language and like how we respond to our athletes like can make or break our relationships with them. And so I also don't believe in like the one size fits all in terms of how you program and treat everybody, but you can connect with people on different levels in different ways while still obviously maintaining and elevating the standards that you have when you make those expectations really clear from the get-go. But like also understanding, and I communicate it to them too, like I make it known that I'm going to treat them in a way that is individual to that person, and that might look different, but that doesn't mean that she's got a different standard than this person. Just might mean like, I know I can get on your ass about something, but I'm going to treat this person a little bit differently because that's not how they respond to me. So
yeah, for sure.
I think when you brought up the word authentic, that really, those two questions really will help kind of bring that to the forefront. And I think it takes a little bit of compassion as well, because even in your example, let's say someone comes in late, it's not like it's a scenario, individual scenario perspective. Like, you really got to figure out the why behind why they're late, or what they're trying to figure out, or what they're trying to just like, maybe they're going through a lot in their day. It's just a handful. So yeah, these are my 2 cents.
For sure. No, I appreciate that. You're right. I mean, everybody's going through things that we don't know about, but I also think too, like especially in college age kids, right? Or really any population, if we work with anybody from, a youth to mid 20s, like they're, understanding like what they're driven by, understanding what they care about. We know that what we do is not the favorite part of their day, and like being okay with that, but also like speaking to them and making an environment that they want to be a part of. And when you make them feel seen and heard, and you make it an environment that they've got some say in, because let's be honest, like especially in college, like every hour of their day is like dictated by something. They've got to be somewhere, they're told what to do, how to act, all of these different things. And like the last thing that they want to do is come into a weight room that it's just another place where they're told what to do, and they just kind of have to blindly go through the motions, and they're just, kind of a passive participant. I want them to be an active participant and a partner in the process. And so I try to do that by inviting them into the process, but also making sure that they understand that I value them as an individual and a human, regardless of their performance, and understand, what it is that they want to get out of it, and just not make it another place where it's just, they come in and they're barked orders and they're not really getting the most out of it.
Do you see any difference working with females compared to males? Have you worked with a lot of male athletes too?
I wouldn't say a lot, but yeah, especially more earlier in my career, when I was at Louisville, I would assist with different teams at various times, but primarily my career has been kind of dominated by women.
Yeah. Well, just like to kind of little note on that. So I read a book about like gender in sports and competition not too long ago. And what I thought was really interesting is that it was like a psychology book. And it kind of talked about how a big difference between males and females is males they'll join a group and they want to make themselves known, and that's how they fit in. Whereas females will join a group and they want to be accepted before they try to make themselves known. And then like I look at the teams I work with, volleyball, females, basketball, males, and the guys are just in there talking shit all the time, being guys, I guess. And the girls is a lot more of just like kind of encouraging each other in a much more positive way. And it's just funny how the two different teams have these different personalities or cultures about them. And I used to kind of get a little frustrated working with the volleyball players because I felt like they weren't competitive. And after I kind of read this book, it's like, no, they're competitive. They just express their competitiveness in a different way, where they're not like guys, they're not trying to bring each other down. They're trying to bring each other up, and still like they're trying to raise the bar for everyone, where guys are trying to show that they're better than each other in the same room. So I was just trying to get your perspective if you've kind of seen the same thing.
Yeah. And I think fundamentally, like male or female, like everybody like has a desire, especially in the age group that we work with, right? Like they're emotional, like they make decisions based off emotion, whether, whatever emotion that is, like, I think that differs a little bit for males and females for sure. And like they care about what other people think of them. And so guys really care about what other people think of them too, but they do it in a way that's like, they want to make sure that they are better, like they're coming out better than everybody else. And like women especially, like for sure, belonging is a huge, for anybody really, but belonging is a huge piece of like the psychological component. And so I think that's why it's such an important concept to truly understand like that population and how they make decisions and like what they care about. It's definitely based off peer pressure and social factors. It's definitely based off, emotion. Like they're not rational thinkers like we are. So like understanding those little details goes so far in, your ability to have conversations with them and also like get through to them. So I'd be curious, like knowing that information after reading that book, like what changes, if any, did you make in terms of like how you structured things or like how you coached your volleyball players versus your, baseball players?
Yeah, the way I communicate with them. So I would say what I do with the basketball guys is I kind of join in on the shit talking a little bit and try to bring out a little bit more competitive edge that way. Whereas girls, I kind of give them a little bit more of words of encouragement and try to bring out more competitiveness that way, I guess. That'd be like the biggest difference between the way I communicate with those two teams.
Have you seen a difference, like, because I see it too, like on ours, like we have some really competitive girls and like, some like would compare them, like they've got attributes or qualities that are maybe more male-like in comparison. So like, have you seen that type of personality in your volleyball team too? And do you address that differently for them?
Yeah, that's interesting. There's definitely a spectrum, like personality traits. And I guess I've never thought about it too much, but I think right now, if I'm thinking about it, I think I do address, I guess, like the females who are like more male characteristic dominated. I do treat them a little bit more like males in a way, the way I talk to them, because that's kind of the way they like to be talked to. That's just their personality, you know.
That's
Sure.
that's one of those read the athlete when they walk in the room, kind of what you were talking about, Mal.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I have an athlete especially too, like she'll call me out, like if I'm, let's say I'm making an adjustment or whatever, like she'll call me out like, no, like I need this, or I want to do this. And I'm like, cool, like do it. Like if that's what you need, cool. So I think that just emphasizes the importance of like, you've got to treat them all a little bit differently. And I take that into consideration too when I plan out their programs of like, okay, what do I know this person needs, but also too, like, what do I know that they like? And, their perception of what we do matters, whether we like to think about it or not. I know, Sean, we talked about in the beginning, like, yeah, we should be, evaluated objectively. Like there's a lot of concrete objective things that we can be evaluated on as strength coaches, but like ultimately there's the subjective matters too. And like, those are some things that we can't measure, but like their perception of us as coaches, but also their perception of the program and everything really matters. So I really try to take that into account as well. And it's not that I don't want them or need them to like me. Like I don't get validation in that, but I also know that their perception of what we're doing and how much it helps or impacts them is going to make a difference in how much investment I get.
Right. Well, we got 1 minute left. Molly, thank you so much for spending the time. We obviously could talk forever, especially about some of the things we talked about beforehand. But I got one last question for you. Who should we reach out to and get on our podcast next? One person. Not Coach Fred Schmiel. Not Coach Fred Schmiel. I love that guy.
Yeah, that was the top of my mind. That was on the top of my mind. I would say Jenna Reddy.
Jenna Reddy at Wake Forest.
Yes.
Coming for you, Coach Reddy.
Yeah.
Awesome. Molly, thank you so much. This has been a blast.
Right.
It's great to reconnect.
That was fast. Thank you, guys.
I know.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Had a fun time.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to the Barbell Nerds podcast. Catch us again next week. We appreciate it. Thank you again, Molly. Take care, everyone.